Have you ever felt invisible in a room just because you couldn't speak up in English? What if the only thing holding you back wasn't your grammar, but your fear of being misunderstood? Hi, my name's Scarlett. I want to tell you about the moment everything changed for me. The moment I realized I had to start talking in English, no matter how scared or awkward I felt. I didn't grow up speaking English. It always felt like a second skin. Too tight. Too unfamiliar. I could understand a lot, read even more, but when it came time to speak, my tongue froze. My brain went blank. But once I moved to the US, silence wasn't an option anymore. I had to survive, connect, belong. So I made a decision. I was going to open my mouth and speak English, even if it wasn't perfect. When I first came to the US, I thought I could manage by just keeping quiet. I told myself I'd learn by listening. Just observe, blend in, and soak it all up. But what I didn't realize was that silence makes you invisible. I remember walking the aisles of Target with a list of things I needed: shampoo, cereal, paper towels. But instead of asking someone for help, I'd wander around for 20 minutes searching and second-guessing myself, too nervous to open my mouth. At my job in a small bakery in Chicago, I handled the backroom inventory while others took customer orders. I convinced myself it was fine, that I was just shy or new, and that talking would come later. But deep down, I was hiding. I was afraid of saying something wrong, of being judged for my accent, of people asking me to repeat myself. So I stayed silent. I laughed when others laughed, nodded when I didn't understand, and kept conversations as short as possible. I was living in America, but I wasn't in America. I was a quiet background character in my own life. That changed on a Sunday afternoon at a backyard barbecue in Austin, Texas. A coworker had invited me, and even though I didn't know anyone, I decided to go. Everyone was standing around with red Solo cups, talking about football, road trips, and vacation plans. I stood by the cooler, trying not to look awkward. A few people smiled at me, and I smiled back, but nobody came over. I felt out of place, like I was watching a movie in a language I didn't fully speak. Then it happened. A girl in a jean jacket walked over and asked, "So, what's your story?" My heart dropped. I could have shrugged or said, "Not much," like I usually did, but something inside me was tired of feeling invisible. So I took a deep breath and started talking. I told her where I was from, why I came to the US, and how I was trying to adjust to life here. I stumbled over a few words. I paused to find the right phrase, but she listened, she nodded, she smiled. And then she asked me more questions. Before I knew it, we were talking for 20 minutes. Then someone else joined in, and another. That small spark, just one moment of speaking up, ignited something inside me. It made me feel like I belonged in the conversation, not just as a guest, but as someone with a voice, a perspective, and a place at the table. From that day on, I pushed myself to speak more, even when it felt uncomfortable. I'd jump into conversations at lunch, even if I didn't have something clever to say. I started asking follow-up questions instead of just saying cool or yeah. I began sharing bits of my life, my opinions, my thoughts, things I'd been holding back for months. I learned that Americans aren't judging your grammar or accent, they're judging your presence, your vibe, your willingness to connect. And connection only happens when you talk. Talking made me visible. It gave people a chance to know me, trust me, and include me. I stopped being the girl who stood quietly in the corner and became the girl who asked you how your day was going. I didn't wait for perfect English. I just used the English I had, and that was enough to open every door. The more I talked, the more I realized that language wasn't just a tool for communication. It was a bridge to real life. Conversations turned into opportunities. I made friends. I got invited plays. People remembered my name. One day at the bakery, a regular customer complimented my voice and said I should try customer service out front. That terrified me. But I didn't say no. I said, "Sure, I can try." My first few shifts were awkward. I fumbled through greetings and mixed up prices. But every "Hi, how are you?" became easier. Every smile from a customer gave me confidence. And slowly, the fear began to shrink. One evening, we had a rush hour at the bakery, lines out the door. I was behind the counter, taking orders non-stop, and for the first time, I didn't feel like I was acting. I wasn't translating in my head. I wasn't doubting my sentences. I was just talking, fast, natural, relaxed. It felt like I was finally in the moment, fully part of the flow. I saw myself in the mirror behind the register and realized I wasn't hiding anymore. I was showing up. Every single day I spoke in English, I was showing up for my life. But there's something else that came with talking. It wasn't just visibility or social connection. It was friendship. Real, deep friendship. And it all started with that first backyard conversation. That girl in the jean jacket, her name's Leah. And the more we talked, the more we clicked. We started grabbing coffee after work, texting back and forth, watching Netflix together. I told her things I hadn't told anyone else. She became my first real friend in America. And it made me realize something huge. Talking is how relationships begin. If I had never opened my mouth that day, I would have missed one of the most beautiful parts of my journey. And this is what led to the next chapter of my transformation. Because once I saw what talking could do in a group setting, I started to wonder, what if I took the first step in one-on-one situations too? What if I didn't wait for others to speak to me, but I started the conversation instead? That moment at the barbecue where I finally spoke up changed something inside me. I had lived in the US for months before that, and yet I had barely felt present. But after that day, I walked home with a different energy. I felt proud, I felt seen, and I kept thinking about how that one simple conversation led to laughter, shared stories, and the start of something real. It made me ask myself a question that wouldn't leave my head. What if I stopped waiting for others to talk to me, and I started talking first? It sounded simple, but for someone like me, who was used to rehearsing lines in my head and avoiding eye contact, it felt like standing on a cliff, trying to convince myself to jump. Still, I knew that if I wanted to build a real life here, I had to do more than answer questions. I had to start them. So, the next week, I made a rule for myself. Every day, I would start one conversation in English, no matter how short, no matter how awkward. At first, I aimed small. At the bakery, I asked a customer, "How's your day going?" She smiled and said, "Better now that I've got coffee." It lasted 10 seconds, but I did it. That was day 1. On day 2, I complimented someone's t-shirt while waiting in line at the pharmacy. "I like your shirt," I said, a little too softly. She turned, smiled, and said, Thanks. Got it on sale at Kohl's. Again, short, but I had opened my mouth first. And every time I did, it felt a little easier. By the end of the week, I wasn't just practicing. I was connecting. But I'll never forget the day that changed everything. It was a rainy Thursday afternoon, and I ducked into a little bookstore in Portland. I love books. They've always made me feel safe. I was walking down the self-help aisle when I reached for a book just as someone else did. Our hands touched the same cover. We both laughed. Then, without thinking, I said, "This book changed how I think about everything." My voice was steady. No script. Just truth. She looked at me with curiosity and said, "Really? I've been meaning to read it. What did you like about it?" That led to a full-blown conversation, right there in the aisle. We stood talking for over 30 minutes. Her name was Amanda. She was a grad student, new to the area like me. Before we left the store, we exchanged numbers and planned to grab coffee that weekend. That one conversation became the first brick in what turned out to be a strong and beautiful friendship. Amanda and I started hanging out regularly. We'd meet at cafes, go for walks in the park, and even visit weekend farmers markets. We talked about books, life, heartbreak, culture, food, everything. With her, I stopped being scared of sounding wrong. She didn't care about my accent. She cared about me. And for the first time, I realized something powerful. People can't connect with you if you don't give them a chance to hear your voice. No one is going to know your personality, your dreams, or your humor if you keep all your words locked inside your head. I started testing this theory in other parts of my life. At the gym, I complimented a woman's sneakers. She thanked me and introduced herself. A few days later, we worked out together. At a community art event, I asked someone, "Have you been to this before?" That turned into a fun chat about local events, which led to an invite to an open mic night. I started realizing how much Americans value friendliness. They don't expect perfection. They appreciate effort. They're used to accents. Many of them are curious about your story, but you have to give them a door to walk through. And for me, that door was my voice. The more I reached out, the more people reached back. My social circle began to grow in a way I never thought possible. I wasn't just collecting phone numbers or names. I was building community. These weren't just people I texted once in a while. They were the ones who showed up when I was sick. They were the ones who helped me move to a new apartment. They celebrated my small wins, like when I passed my driving test. And they listened when I had a rough day. And none of it would have happened if I had waited quietly, hoping someone else would start the conversation. There's something deeply vulnerable about speaking in your second language, especially in a country where everyone else seems so confident and fast. But what I learned is that vulnerability is what creates real connection. When I said, "I'm not sure how to say this," or "Can you help me with this word?" people didn't laugh. They leaned in. They appreciated the honesty, and that honesty invited them to open up too. It made our conversations more human, more sincere. I remember a Sunday morning brunch at Amanda's place. She'd invited a few friends over, and I was nervous. Again, the only non-native English speaker in the room. But I remembered my rule: start the conversation. So I asked someone across the table, "What's your favorite way to spend a lazy Sunday?" Everyone chimed in. We laughed. Someone joked about staying in pajamas till 4 p.m. That simple question turned into an hour-long conversation about childhood traditions, weekend routines, and even family recipes. At the end of that brunch, one of Amanda's friends hugged me and said, "You're so easy to talk to." I almost cried. That sentence meant the world to me. It reminded me that my words had value, even if they weren't perfect. But don't get me wrong, it wasn't always easy. There were still moments when I said the wrong thing or misunderstood someone's joke. There were times I got lost in conversations that moved too fast or had too much slang. But I stopped letting those moments define me. Instead, I used them as reminders that I was learning by doing. Every awkward sentence was progress. Every time I chose to talk first, I was pushing fear aside and choosing courage. Eventually, I started using English not just in social settings, but in my private life too. I changed the language on my phone to English. I wrote journal entries in English. I even started dreaming in English. My brain was rewiring itself, not through silent study, but through active speaking. Because speaking, I've learned, is not just an output. It's a catalyst. It forces your brain to connect faster, think quicker, and grow stronger. And the more I used English to build connections, the more natural it began to feel. Friendship, at its core, is about trust, and trust comes from sharing your thoughts, your feelings, your time. Talking first, even when it feels scary, is a way of saying, I trust that you'll listen. And most of the time, people do. They respond, they open up. And if they don't, that's okay too. Because each time you speak first, you're building a version of yourself that's bolder, more confident, more alive. I used to think speaking English was just a skill. Now I know it's a bridge, a lifeline, a way to turn strangers into friends and friends into family. As Amanda and I sat at our usual coffee shop one rainy afternoon, laughing about how awkward we both were during that first bookstore conversation, I realized something beautiful. Friendships like this weren't found. They were built with courage, with effort, and with the decision to speak first. And that realization carried me into the next phase of my journey, one that didn't just change how I connected with others, it changed how I saw myself. Because the more I talked in English, the more confident I became. Not before speaking, but by speaking. Amanda and I kept meeting up at that cozy coffee shop. Our little corner table near the window became a space where I felt safe to be myself. I used to feel like I had to prepare every sentence in my head before speaking, but now I was letting words come out naturally, even if they weren't polished. We'd sit there with our lattes, swapping stories about our week, laughing at silly memes, talking about everything from relationships to reality shows. And somewhere in between those long conversations, I started noticing something new in myself, something I hadn't felt in a very long time. Confidence. Not the kind of fake confidence you put on like a mask when you're nervous, but the real kind. The kind that comes when you finally stop doubting every word you say. But I didn't feel confident before I started talking. No, it came because I kept talking. Even when I felt shaky, even when I stumbled, even when I wanted to give up and hide. That's what I wish someone had told me earlier. Confidence doesn't wait for you to be perfect. It grows when you dare to show up anyway. I remember one day I was riding the subway in New York. It was my first time alone in the city, and I was trying to get to 96th Street. I had checked Google Maps before leaving, but somewhere along the ride, I got confused. My phone battery had died. I felt that old panic rising in my chest, the kind that used to freeze my mouth shut. But this time, I pushed through it. I looked at the woman next to me and said, "Excuse me, do you know if this train stops at 96th? My voice cracked slightly, but she smiled and said, "Yeah, it does. I'm getting off there too. Just follow me." That moment changed me. Not because I got the directions I needed, but because I realized I had the power to ask for help. My words had worked. I hadn't been laughed at, ignored, or judged. I'd been helped. That tiny victory lit a fire inside me. It made me realize that talking, just talking, was how I'd claim my place in this world. From then on, I stopped holding back in everyday situations. I talked to the cashier at Trader Joe's about their seasonal snacks. I chatted with my Uber driver about the weather and traffic. I asked my neighbor if they knew a good local mechanic. These weren't life-changing conversations, but they changed me. Each one chipped away at the fear I'd built up inside. I began to see English not as a test I had to pass, but as a tool I could use. A living, breathing part of my life. The more I spoke, the more natural it felt. Not just the words, but the act of speaking. I started smiling more, holding my head higher, and walking into rooms without shrinking into myself. And here's the truth nobody tells you. Confidence in English doesn't come from thinking about talking. It comes from doing it. I used to sit at home with grammar books and YouTube videos, convinced that if I just studied enough, I'd feel ready. But no matter how many phrases I memorized, nothing changed until I started speaking out loud. Even when I was alone, I'd practice talking to myself. I'd describe what I was doing as I cooked dinner. I'd respond to TV characters. I'd rehearse how I'd order food or greet someone at work. These mini conversations trained my brain to think in English and trained my mouth to move with it. Slowly, my words started to flow. One of the biggest turning points came at a company meeting. I was working part-time at a design studio in Seattle, mostly doing behind-the-scenes support work. During one meeting, my manager asked if anyone had suggestions for improving our social media posts. My heart started pounding. I had an idea. I really did. But I hesitated. I looked around the room. Everyone was so polished, so fluent. For a moment, I felt like I didn't belong. But then I remembered everything I'd been practicing. I reminded myself that confidence doesn't come from being the smartest in the room. It comes from showing up. So I raised my hand and said, "What if we used more casual language in our captions, like everyday phrases that feel more personal?" I braced for judgment, but instead the manager nodded and said, "That's a great idea. Let's try that." Everyone agreed. And just like that, I had contributed. My voice had made a difference. That moment stayed with me. It wasn't about impressing anyone. It was about participating. I finally understood what it meant to stop sitting on the sidelines of my own life. Every conversation, every little hello or how's it going was practice. And every time I spoke, I was building something much bigger than vocabulary. I was building belief in myself. But of course, there were still hard days. Days when my accent felt too thick, or when I couldn't find the right word fast enough. I'd get tongue-tied or mix up expressions. Once I told someone I was feeling blue when I meant feeling cold, and we both laughed about it later. These little mistakes used to make me feel embarrassed, but now I see them as part of the journey. Every mistake is a sign that I tried, that I had the guts to open my mouth and speak when staying silent would have been easier. One of the most healing parts of this journey has been learning to be kind to myself. When I first started talking in English, I'd criticize every little thing I said. I'd replay conversations in my head and cringe over mispronunciations. But over time, I realized that no one else was thinking about my mistakes the way I was. Most people barely noticed. What they remembered was the connection, the smile, the eye contact, the shared laughter. Americans value effort, not perfection. That's when I started giving myself permission to be imperfect, to stumble, to learn out loud, and in doing that, I felt something shift inside me. I started liking the sound of my own voice, even with an accent, especially with an accent, because it told a story. My story. I remember one late-night walk with Amanda in the city. We were passing a park, the streetlights casting long shadows on the sidewalk, and she turned to me and said, "You know, when I first met you, you were so quiet, but now you're one of the most confident people I know." That compliment caught me off guard, not because I didn't believe her, but because I finally did. I smiled and said, "It's because I stopped waiting to feel ready and just started talking." She laughed and said, "Well, keep talking. You've got a lot to say." That's the thing. I always had something to say. So do you. We all do. But we hold back because we think we're not enough. Not fluent enough, smart enough, native enough. But the only way to become confident is to act confident before you feel it. It's a decision, a muscle, a habit. And once I realized that, I started creating little moments of bravery every day. At the DMV, I asked for clarification without apologizing. At a dentist appointment, I cracked a joke while in the waiting room. At the library, I asked for a book recommendation instead of Googling it myself. These aren't dramatic moments, but they're the building blocks of a new identity. Each one added a brick to the foundation of my self-worth. Today, when I look in the mirror, I don't see a shy girl hiding behind silent thoughts. I see a woman who speaks up, who shares, who belongs, and not because I reached some magical level of English perfection, but because I decided to participate in life, to raise my hand, to greet first, to laugh out loud, to make mistakes with grace, and to trust that my voice matters. So, if you're waiting to feel confident before you talk, don't. Talk anyway. Talk nervously. Talk imperfectly. But talk. Because every time you do, you get stronger. You stop just living in America and start thriving in it. And that brings me to one of the most important shifts in my entire journey, the point where speaking English stopped being just about communication and started becoming part of who I was, no matter where I was or who I was with. Looking back now, I can't believe how far I've come. From that quiet girl who stood by the cooler at a backyard barbecue, too afraid to speak, to the woman I am today, bold, open, and unafraid to use my voice in any room I walk into. Every part of this journey, every shaky hello, every awkward pause, every stumble, was a brick in the foundation of the life I've built here in America. But more importantly, It's a reminder of something so many of us forget. We don't find our voice by waiting for permission. We find it by using it. I used to think speaking English meant mastering grammar, vocabulary, and pronunciation. But now I know it's about showing up. It's about saying, I belong here with every word, even when it doesn't sound perfect. It's about taking up space in the world with your truth. If you're holding back, I get it. I've been there. I know what it feels like to doubt every sentence, to shrink in group settings, to think, maybe I'll just listen today. But here's what I've learned. Silence doesn't protect you. It isolates you. And talking, even when it's scary, is what sets you free. Because the more you talk, the more you grow. You grow in confidence, in connection, in clarity. You stop surviving and start living. You stop being a spectator and become the main character in your own story. You make friends. You get noticed. You open doors you didn't even know were there. And slowly, English becomes more than just a language you speak. It becomes a part of you. Not because you speak it perfectly, but because you speak it bravely. So today, if you're watching this, I want you to remember something. Your voice matters. Your story matters. And your words, yes, your words deserve to be heard. Don't wait for the perfect moment. Don't wait for confidence to knock on your door. Go out there and start talking. Say something, anything. Start a conversation. Join one. Ask a question. Share a thought. Because the moment you do, you'll feel something powerful rise inside you. Ownership of your space, your future, your life. I didn't become confident before I spoke. I became confident because I kept speaking. And you can too. So talk. Talk scared. Talk slowly. Talk often. Just don't stay silent. Because talking isn't just about language. It's about becoming who you were always meant to be.